In Extreme Danger is back on BBC One in 2 weeks.
Everything's gonna be alright.
You realise now that nowhere is safe, no job is safe.
Everything's gonna be alright.
We have to pay the mortgage or lose the house.
It really is sad.
Happiness is a secure job.
We're just on the scrap heap.
How safe is yours? Panorama, Monday at 10 on BBC One.
What's going on between you and Niamh?
We're not getting on.
How bad is it?
He doesn't know how bad it is. That's how bad it is.
If she's fed up with me, then she's fed up with me.
You're on very dangerous ground here.
Now here you go again. You say you want your freedom. Well, who am I to keep you down?
Ballycay, Sunday at 8 on BBC One.
Kicking off the Comedy Zone over on BBC Two in a moment, Paul Whitehouse and the Fast Show gang. They're smiling now, but things get serious for Dr. Page and D.I. Kramer. Dangerfield on BBC One in half an hour. The 9 o'clock news, first on BBC One with Michael Buerk.
Britain's biggest car plant has been offered a deal to save it from closure. Thousands of Rover jobs will have to go at Longbridge. The rest will have to work more flexibly to give the factory a future. Pleading for Pinochet, Chile's foreign minister comes to ask for the dictator's release. And the bird's at risk if a British island joins the space race. Good evening. Rover car workers will start voting next week on a deal to save the country's biggest car plant at Longbridge in Birmingham. The company's owners, BMW, have reached agreement with the unions on a plan to keep the factory going. It would mean 2,500 redundancies and radical new working practices for those workers who remain. If the workforce vote for the deal, BMW say they'll invest more than £1.5 billion in the company.
The BMW axe has been hanging over Longbridge for 6 weeks. The German owners told Rover it would close the plant unless productivity, output per worker, rose. No changes, no future. Today, workers learned that their union leaders have agreed change.
Anything's going to be better than losing your job, isn't it?
I think basically they've got us over a barrel. We either accept what they say or we're out of a job, so nothing more you can do about it.
If Rover goes, so does half the industry of the Midlands. And you can't have 50, 60,000 people chasing every job that becomes available. It just won't work.
There'll be bitter medicine. The deal means 2,500 jobs going. Overtime pay will end. Annual hours will be laid down, worked when the company needs them. But the carrot, £1.5 billion of investment.
All those in favour, please show.
We're a long way from the 70s when mass meetings threw out what union leaders had agreed. Tonight, the selling job is on.
At the end of the day, to secure Longbridge and the future of Rover as a manufacturing company on the basis of partnership is a deal worth having. Indeed, it's a deal we have to have.
BMW is the third foreign firm to threaten to close a British plant. American Ford and General Motors got big improvements plus government grants. Those who broker deals between firms and government say harder deals are now being driven.
The company will have a leverage, of course, but at the same time, UK government has to make sure that there is going to be a good benefit to the UK economy and will not necessarily accept every applicant.
BMW bosses have lobbied hard. No plea for state aid yet. One may be made. The minister brokering the deal is pleased.
Well, it's good news, and it's something that we've been patiently working for from the beginning. I'm not saying that the company or Longbridge is entirely out of the woods yet, but what's been agreed is a very important basis for a great deal more hope than we've had before.
Each BMW worker makes 4 cars for every 3 turned out by a Rover worker. Better machinery should bump up productivity, eventually raise pay and cut hours, but not without short-term pain. All Rover's 40,000 workers start voting on this deal next week. They may not like what their leaders have negotiated, but on the face of it, they don't seem to have much choice. Stephen Evans, BBC News.
The Foreign Secretary Robin Cook has met his Chilean counterpart to discuss Spain's request to extradite the former Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet. Mr Cook said he'd assured him that the General's arrest was not politically motivated. The Home Secretary, Jack Straw, has been given until December the 11th to decide whether the extradition should go ahead.
A taste of the turmoil which has engulfed Chile at the Foreign Office in London tonight. Ironically, the country's socialist foreign minister, who was exiled himself during the Pinochet years, is now the subject of left-wing anger because he wants to get Pinochet off the hook. There was little access for cameras. Neither side want light shed on talks which the government insists will not influence the final decision. In a statement, the Foreign Secretary Robin Cook said that Mr Insulza had been told that neither the arrest of General Pinochet nor subsequent steps had been politically motivated. And he said there was a shared commitment to maintaining good relations between the two countries. While General Pinochet rests from his operation, still hoping to escape on medical grounds, the message the Foreign Minister is bringing to Europe is simple. If Chile can live with its former dictator, then the world should leave him alone. Meanwhile, Bow Street magistrates have ruled that General Pinochet will have to appear here in person on December the 11th, extending the deadline. And even that won't be the last word. If the Home Secretary Jack Straw does send the case for a full extradition hearing, that'll take months in court before he considers it a second time. The government has maintained and will maintain that this is just a judicial process. It is, of course, much more than that. What's being played out now is high political drama between Britain, Chile and Spain. The Chilean foreign minister will meet as many people as he can in London before going on to Spain, where they're not relishing this particular hot potato falling into their laps. David Loyne, BBC News at the Foreign Office.
Calm has returned to Chile after the violent demonstrations in the wake of the House of Lords ruling keeping General Pinochet in London for the time being. The dispute over the former dictator's fate is being seen by many in Chile as a test of the country's recent transition to democracy. Our special correspondent Ben Brown is in the capital, Santiago.
Only General Pinochet's most fervent followers are still bothering to demonstrate against his detention. Just a couple of hundred people turned up at this latest pro-Pinochet rally. Some of them are neo-Nazi extremists who yearn for the days of his dictatorship and who despise Britain for what it's done to their hero. But the Santiago police have little patience with these protesters. They're quickly rounded up and cleared from the streets. This extradition case has certainly sparked off unrest, but it's been much less than many people had feared, and not hard for the authorities to deal with. Across town at the same time, these people would rather celebrate than demonstrate. They're the younger generation of General Pinochet's opponents, who believe that with him out of the country, Chile can come to terms with its past and build a democratic future.
We think that this ruling that will leave Pinochet abroad for a longer period of time will be a chance where this country can show that people just want to live in a different way. And I think we need that opportunity to do it well.
The military are still immensely strong here, but they seem to have accepted there's not much they can do to save their former commander. Chile is relatively calm, and political commentators here believe democracy may have been made stronger by all of this, not weaker.
The detention of Pinochet has helped democracy considerably, has opened a debate, and there has been a sea change. The human rights issue has become center stage. The country has changed considerably, and for the first time we're having a serious debate about the transition and doing away with the authoritarian enclaves, such as the military or military justice.
After all the years of dictatorship, Chile still needs to go through a process of national reconciliation and healing. And there are many here who believe that can only happen if General Pinochet is put on trial. Ben Brown, BBC News, Santiago.
Here, new measures to clamp down on football hooligans have been published by the government. They include orders for known troublemakers to surrender their passports 5 days before foreign matches to prevent them from travelling abroad. There are also plans to stamp out racist chants and ticket touts.
The review of football legislation was announced in February, and the measures it produced today was described by ministers as the most far-reaching anti-hooligan package ever considered by government. The riot in Marseille during the World Cup, involving hundreds of English fans, highlighted the urgent need to tackle the movement of hooligans abroad. The ringleaders of the disturbances, among them James Shaler, have faced no penalty in a British court despite being convicted in France. But under the new proposals, anyone even suspected of being involved in violence could be banned from travelling.
When a banning order is served, they have to actually give in their passport 5 days before a match, which means that rather than at the moment when someone is banned, they can still travel. This will make clear that the law is meant to be carried out. If we're going to make a law, there's no point it being abused. It's being abused at the moment. We have to find a way of making sure it isn't.
Among the 29 recommendations in the consultation document, there's a strong emphasis on removing racist chanting from the terraces. There are also plans to introduce alcohol bans where necessary. The football authorities have welcomed the government's initiative, but is there a risk of going too far?
When I see a few people disrupting the civil liberties, not only of the vast majority of our supporters, but of foreign nations abroad, I mean, why should the French or the Dutch have to put up with that? And so the civil liberties, from my point of view, are those people that are having them spoilt by the troublemakers. So I would make a few suffer for the benefit of the majority.
The Home Office said this evening it was reviewing the cases of all hooligans dealt with by the French authorities last summer to see whether further court action in this country would be possible. A draft bill is now being prepared in the hope of introducing the new measures in the current parliamentary session. The government believes it's vital that tougher sanctions are in place in time for the European Football Championships in the year 2000. Paul Newman, BBC News, Highbury.
Tony Blair has said he believes the Welsh Secretary, Alan Michael, is the ideal candidate to lead the new Welsh Assembly. But during a visit to South Wales, he said claims that London-based members of the Labour Party were trying to influence the leadership campaign were rubbish.
With the Welsh Secretary Alan Michael at his side, the Prime Minister toured a community centre in the Cynon Valley. He used the occasion to give a clear and open endorsement of Mr Michael as the candidate he would prefer to see as Labour's leader in the Welsh Assembly.
First Minister's job is the successor job to the Secretary of State for Wales. The First Minister's the person who's going to be handling decisions on jobs and industry, schools and hospitals and housing that's presently done by the Secretary of State for Wales. I make no apology for being a strong supporter of Alan Michael. I think he's a great guy. That's why I appointed him to the job.
Alan Michael wasn't going to decline the Prime Minister's support.
The leadership is something that will be decided here in Wales. The Prime Minister's made it very clear, though, that the process of devolution is one that has his full support. I take great heart for that.
In a meeting of some 200 party members shortly afterwards, Tony Blair was more circumspect. Alan Michael's rival for the job, Rhodri Morgan, was in the audience. He didn't get to make his point, but others did.
Can you assure us that there'll be no support for any one candidate from Millbank in our elections to the Welsh leader of the Assembly Group?
Really, believe me when I say the beginning of the end for us is if we start putting London against Cardiff, Scotland against Wales, England against Wales. It's a load of nonsense.
Rhodri Morgan believes it's the duty of the leadership to stay neutral in the contest.
What he does is entirely up to him, but I am not sure that it would be helpful, either to me or Alan Michael, if he were to come into a race in a way when he certainly didn't in the race between Ron Davies and myself.
Alan Michael's supporters hope the Prime Minister's intervention will give his campaign a much-needed boost, but it's a long way to go until the issue is decided in February. Tony Blair's open support for Alan Michael, the incumbent here at the Welsh office for the top job in the Assembly, is something of a gamble. It could prove counterproductive amongst party members already complaining, rightly or wrongly, about interference from London. Glenn Mathias, BBC News, Cardiff.
Israel's President Benjamin Netanyahu has cut short a visit to Britain after a bomb attack killed 2 Israeli soldiers in southern Lebanon. The latest attack brings to 7 the number of Israeli soldiers killed in the last few days. Mr. Netanyahu has promised to review Israel's policy in Lebanon, where it's occupied a self-declared security zone for 20 years. French police hunting the murderer of the Cornish schoolgirl Caroline Dickinson have issued a new photo-fit picture of a suspect. It was put together by a French girl who says the original photo-fit of Caroline's killer looks like the man who raped her in 1993. Caroline was raped and killed in a hostel in Brittany while on a school trip 2 years ago. A man has been jailed for life in the Irish Republic for murdering the investigative journalist Veronica Guerin. Paul Ward was convicted on the evidence of a police informer. As Guerin, who reported extensively on Ireland's drug dealers, was shot dead while sitting in her car 2 years ago. One of the Caribbean's most important nesting sites for seabirds could be in danger if a tiny island is allowed to join the international space race. The fate of the birds is in the hands of ministers here, who have the power to veto proposals from an American company, Beale Aerospace, which wants to take over the island of Sombrero, part of the British dependent territory of Anguilla. It wants to use it to launch satellites by rocket into space. But as our environment correspondent Robert Piggott reports, ornithologists say the rocket station could spell the end for seabirds nesting there.
Sombrero Island, 95 acres of arid limestone 34 miles from the nearest land, is the site chosen for the world's next rocket station. Just 40 feet high, the island is open to storms. The last lighthouse was destroyed in a hurricane. Sombrero is home to thousands of migrating seabirds. Brown and masked boobies are nesting now. At other times, there are species of tern, noddy, frigate and tropic birds.
Sombrero is probably the most important seabird breeding island in the entire region. Seabirds need solitude to breed, and they need islands that are free of predators and free usually of too much vegetation. And this site is perfect.
Phosphate mining drastically reduced Sombrero's bird population in the 19th century. They eventually recovered, but ornithologists say a rocket station could wipe them out.
If rockets come to Sombrero, this is where they'll blast off, and the island may not have long to wait. Beale Aerospace would like to complete the site by the year 2000. When the airstrip, launch pad, buildings and harbour are complete, the island will be barely recognisable, and many of its seabird nesting sites will have gone forever.
Many seabirds breed in the place they were born. Conservationists say birds will return to Sombrero, but fail to raise their young. They claim that even the Sombrero black could be at risk. The lizard is found only on the island. The dangers to Sombrero's wildlife have been assessed by a firm of environmental consultants. The British government is now studying their report. The governor of Anguilla says the threat to seabirds is clear.
That problem is real. It won't go away. Damage is inevitable, and I don't think they shy away from saying that. What they're saying is that it is possible to mitigate it to a degree, and that the damage is not perhaps as total as potential damage is not as total as people thought.
In Texas, Beale Aerospace have been testing their rocket. When loaded with hydrogen peroxide and kerosene fuel, the 200-foot-tall rocket will weigh 1,000 tons and carry satellites into outer space. It's a business worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The company questions whether seabirds should stand in the way.
You could go down and stop building every house in the Caribbean region, and that would probably help the birds. You could tell us we can't use Sombrero Island, and that would probably help the birds. But is that what we really want to do for the nation of Anguilla and as a world?
Beale Aerospace will buy land in the Caribbean the same size as Sombrero and try to recreate the breeding conditions found there. The company is prepared to pay only $250,000 a year to lease the island. They say the real benefits to Anguilla will come with increased tourism and employment. The government of Anguilla is ready to accept the deal. It's banking on Sombrero, bringing it greater benefit as a rocket station than it ever could as a bird sanctuary. Robert Piggott, BBC News, Sombrero Island in the Caribbean.
The government's playing down rumours of a split between Britain and Germany over the levels of tax in the European Union. The German finance minister, Oscar Lafontaine, is keen to see taxes being set at the same rates throughout the EU. But the Chancellor, Gordon Brown, has already said he'd use Britain's veto to stop that happening.
This was the result Tony Blair badly wanted. A Germany sympathetic to Britain's European difficulties, with a leader, Gerhard Schröder, the closest they come to New Labour. But it hasn't quite worked out like that. Ministers are having to deny rumours of ruptures, particularly between Gordon Brown, the Chancellor, and his very old Labour opposite number, Oscar Lafontaine.
The Treasury isn't at loggerheads with our German counterparts. We will be discussing a range of issues with them and with our other European partners over the coming weeks.
It all looked so cordial when EU leaders met in Austria recently. Soon after, Gordon Brown helped other centre-left finance ministers to produce an economic wish list. Their document, put out on the internet, pledged to bring some taxes closer together. Mr. Lafontaine talked up the promise. He was joined by several European commissioners. This left the Chancellor having to warn that Britain would veto any such move. In the Labour Party, there's little disguising the anger.
The Social Democrats had to reach a deal with the Greens, and taxation policy was part of that. That is, one, therefore related to internal German politics. Secondly, relating to Oscar Lafontaine himself, who has acted in a very brusque and undiplomatic way and has put up the backs of many folks.
With the euro up and running in just over a month, top financiers were in London today to ensure its smooth passage. But the row over tax couldn't have come at a worse time for the British government. Some put it down to the inexperience of the new administration in Germany.
It's quite normal that new governments issue new sums, and after some time they are folding in the mold.
Until now, the government's shown a relatively sure touch on Europe, but the question of who levies which taxes has produced a new bout of Euro-bashing in the press. And whether the concerns are real or imagined, they provide a fresh reminder to ministers that closer relations with Europe won't come easy. John Campner, BBC News, at the Treasury.
There's been a sharp fall in Barclays shares following the unexpected resignation of the bank's chief executive, Martin Taylor. No official reason was given for his resignation, but the announcement wiped billions of pounds off the value of the shares.
When at the age of 41, Martin Taylor swept into Barclays, he was hailed as a breath of fresh air, the man who'd shake up a stuffy bank struggling to recover from the recession.
If you think the bank is doing more than usually stupid things, will you tell me? No, you must do it.
But 5 years later, the man who became one of New Labour's favourite businessmen has suddenly announced he's giving up the job. With the chairman, Andrew Buxton, also retiring, there's now a power vacuum at Barclays. It's been a bad year for the bank. When Russia's economy went into freefall in the summer, Mr. Taylor had to reveal that Barclays had lost £250 million on loans there. The bank also admitted it had investments in a high-risk fund which almost went bankrupt. Today, investors were worried that Mr. Taylor's sudden departure meant there was more bad news in the offing. His chairman said there was a simpler explanation.
Martin has been getting increasingly restless this year. He's had a tough year. This is a tough job. He's CEO of one of the top 10 companies in the UK. And I think he's reached a stage where he feels he wants to move on.
There's also been speculation that Mr. Taylor may have fallen out with colleagues over strategy, in particular whether Barclays now needed to merge with another bank to have a secure future. Barclays has been slipping down the league table of the big high street banks. Lloyds TSB has the highest stock market valuation, followed by HSBC, owners of Midland. And today the Halifax moved into third place, with the fall in Barclays' share price pushing it down to fourth, just ahead of NatWest.
Well, Barclays is caught between two different types of bank. It's bigger, but not much bigger now than the building societies. It's much smaller than the global banks, which are themselves merging into even bigger banks. So it's caught in that very sticky patch in the middle, and it's probably going to have to merge to survive.
It's the abrupt manner of Martin Taylor's departure from this boardroom which has caused such confusion and done such damage to Barclays' share price. The bank will now be under growing pressure to name a convincing successor and explain how it sees its future. Rory Kettler-Jones, BBC News, at Barclays head office.
The Scottish National Party has won the Euro by-election in North East Scotland. The SNP increased its majority, although just 20% of the electorate turned out to vote. Labour were pushed into third place by the Conservatives.
Ian Stewart Hudgden, 57,445.
A double bonus for the Nationalists, an increased majority, with Labour, their bitter rivals, pushed into third place. The Liberal Democrats, fourth, but they insist still in touch. The Tories, a slight revival after their general election collapse.
The tide has turned. We've shown that we were up and fighting fit, and we've fought back.
So what went wrong for Labour, who held this seat until 4 years ago? First, no inroads into the rural areas of this vast constituency, contending with the current problems in farming. But perhaps also mid-term economic blues among Labour's city support, as borne out on the streets of Aberdeen tonight.
Folk are feeling a bit disenchanted with Labour because they haven't fulfilled their promise, perhaps.
Well, look, if it's happened, like,
to the country since Labour's went into power. It's never really been the best.
I think things have improved a lot, like daycare, like for working parents and things like that.
And there were question marks too over the Labour candidate, who was caught out over inaccurate claims that she had been born in the constituency. But she denied there were wider implications.
Because of the disappointing turnout, I don't see what we can draw from this. 4 in 5 people have sadly stayed at home.
Hey folks, this is the man you want to see.
Momentum matters in politics, and so tonight the new Euro MP returned to his Aberdeen HQ to talk tactics with potential candidates for next year's elections to the new Scottish Parliament.
It's a complete disaster for Labour to find themselves in the position of managing to come third in what they billed as a two-horse race.
A note of caution, this was a European by-election with a low turnout. The impact is perhaps more psychological than political, a morale booster for the SNP and, incidentally, the Tories. For Labour tonight, further confirmation, if it were needed, that the party faces a stiff contest in next May's Scottish parliamentary elections. Brian Taylor, BBC News, Aberdeen.
Tennis. In the battle of the two Britons, Greg Rosetsky took just over an hour to defeat Tim Henman 6-2, 6-4 in the ATP Tour Championship. Rosetsky's victory took him from 11th place to 9th in the world rankings.
Effectively, it's the unofficial World Championship of tennis, and just a few years ago, the idea that two Britons should be competing in it would have seemed about as likely as the Wimbledon caterers selling strawberry and cream at cost price. Though the Canadian-born Greg Rosetsky is to many about as British as maple syrup, that tends to get forgotten as long as he's winning, which he was doing convincingly in Hanover today. He was only competing because Andre Agassi had withdrawn with a bad back, and it has to be acknowledged that Henman had already clinched a semi-final place. But that said, such is the rivalry between the two that their matches always have an edge, and Rosetsky proved his point by taking the first set 6-2. Too late, Henman raised his game, discovering some of the form which has taken him to his highest ranking yet, 8th in the world. But Rosetsky was the man commanding the stage, and clearly enjoying it. After barely more than an hour on court, he completed a straight sets win, which also elevates him into the world top 10.
The motivation was I go from 11 to 8 in the world, so I'm back in the top 10, back in the elite 8 players in the world. So there was a lot riding on it for me today, and there's always that rivalry between myself and Tim, and it's great to be able to win that one. And at the end we had a few words, and I wished him well in the championships, and I think he has a good chance to go to the finals and maybe win it all.
Two players in the top 10. British tennis hasn't known such riches since the 30s. Kevin Geary, BBC News.
But despite his victory, Greg Rosetsky won't go through to tomorrow's semi-finals because of the outcome of the last group match in which Alex Corretja beat Albert Costa. Now, the main news again tonight. Britain's biggest car plant has been offered a deal to save it from closure. Thousands of Rover jobs will have to go at Longbridge. The rest will have to work more flexibly to give the factory a future. And the Foreign Secretary Robin Cook has met the Chilean Foreign Minister to discuss Spain's request to extradite the former Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet. News Notes on BBC Two at 10:30, but that's all from the 9 o'clock news. Good night.
This is BBC One in the South. Now the latest news from South Today.
Good evening. A mother and son caught in a house fire may have died because illegally parked cars blocked the route for firefighters. One fire crew reached the burning house at Hastings in East Sussex within minutes, but cars parked along double yellow lines delayed others getting through. The victims have been named as 29-year-old Sharon Gunner and her 11-year-old son Stuart Kingston. Sean Killock reports.
The fire broke out at 3 o'clock this morning. The father managed to alert his two daughters and their grandmother, but the mother and her 11-year-old son were trapped. The house wasn't fitted with smoke alarms, and the rescue attempt was hampered by parked cars.
Cars parked either side of the road, ignoring the clearly marked double yellow lines, caused us some tremendous operational difficulties.
Are you saying lives would have been saved had they not been there, those cars?
The potential for lives being saved was there.
Residents say they've previously complained about the parking problem and feared a tragedy like this might happen.
How far are you supposed to get through with cars like that, and absolutely nothing's ever been done about this. I mean, you know, always complaining all the time, and it just never get done.
Tonight there are calls for tougher action on illegally parked cars. Sean Killick, BBC South Today, Hastings.
Meanwhile, in Hampshire, firefighters were stretched to their limits with 5 major fires at once. The biggest was at a boatyard in Southampton. Freddie Rostand reports.
One of the city's premier yacht builders goes up in flames. Southampton Yacht Services at Shamrock Quay was completely destroyed. It took 150 firefighters and 25 engines to get it under control. We can see the damage. In the yard behind me there were 4 yachts, 1 brand new one and 3 major refits. In the building next to it, it was a 2-storey timber yard, higher even than the scaffolding. It was full of teak and mahogany. The damage must be calculated in millions.
They were big 80-foot boats and they were just gone. A lot of work goes into them, a lot of heartache, a lot of pain, and to see all your work go up in smoke is a little bit upsetting.
It was the biggest of 5 fires within hours of each other last night, stretching Hampshire Fire and Rescue Service to the limit. Its cause is being investigated. Freddie Rostand of BBC South Today.
A cross-channel passenger ferry has failed a number of safety checks. Condor Ferries brought the ship Havelet out of mothballs to act as backup for its Channel Island routes this winter. This autumn it's only been used 4 times. It was impounded by marine inspectors who found 36 separate safety failures. The captain says they were minor. Marine inspectors have now released her. Tonight she's safe to sail. Well, that's the news this evening. The weekend starts here, but of course the news continues on CFAX page 160 and your BBC local radio stations. Good night.
Evening to you. Should be able to turn the heating down a little bit tonight, but then it'll have to go back up again tomorrow. 2 changes taking place. First of all, this particular warm front introducing this warm air. In fact, temperatures tonight will probably be higher than those tomorrow, and then the cold front back to square one as that comes along during the course of the day. So we have these warm southerly winds at the moment. They're going to turn round to the west and eventually the northwest during the course of the day. Quite strong winds, incidentally, coming into that northwestern corner late on. A lot of cloud across us at the moment, and this weather band already producing some outbreaks of rain in Ireland and western Scotland, and that rain is going to work its way into the rest of Scotland and into Wales and western parts of England during the course of the night. Somewhat clearer weather following in Ireland and the west of Scotland. Eastern areas of England staying pretty murky and misty with a little bit of drizzle around as well and some fog lapping those hilltops. But a mild night everywhere, the temperatures, if anything, rising a little bit as the night goes on, except in Ireland where it'll turn cooler late on. There's that front tomorrow, eventually in the afternoon, moving out into the North Sea. We start off pretty wet, though, through a slice here, eastern Scotland down to western areas, and that fairly heavy rain moving into central and eastern parts during the course of the day, eventually clearing away from the southeast around about tea time. Once it's gone, for eastern areas, it'll be dry and bright with some sunny intervals, but there will be showers in the west. 1 or 2 quite heavy ones in that northwestern corner, blown in by that strong wind and turning wintry over the hills. The wind and the showers, I think, and the lower temperatures will make it feel fairly chilly tomorrow. 8 or 9 in the north, still 11 or so in the south. Touch of frost tomorrow night. Then for most of England and Wales, it'll be a dry and bright day on Sunday. There will be showers, though, in northwestern areas, and I think those showers will be replaced by some more general cloud and rain late on in the day. If you're off to the continent, and certainly if you're off to the Mediterranean, I think the message is take a Mac with you, because it's going to be pretty unsettled there with some showers, some of them fairly heavy. Most of Europe remains cold and wintry with temperatures not far off freezing. That's all from me. Have a lovely weekend.
You can see highlights of today's tennis match between Tim Henman and Greg Rosetsky on BBC One tonight at 11:40. Original comedy with an Asian slant on BBC Two now. Surprise yourself with Goodness Gracious Me.
Fosse beer and a salad. Por favor, una caña y patatas bravas.
Grandad, did you know that when you cook broccoli for over 15 minutes, you lose over half of its vitamin C?
What icon? I've already tried that.
The problem is you haven't got enough memory. If you close down some of the applications and then reboot, that'll sort you out, okay?
Sometimes you can surprise yourself by just how much you know. For more details on BBC programmes that get you thinking, check out our website or see facts page 634.
Looking back, right, you got to laugh at some of the gear I was wearing.
From humble beginnings.
When I was a kid, I was the kind of lad, I was sort of the kind of lad my mum didn't want me to play with.
To his big break in television.
The producer put together me and a man I have grown to love, the great JV. I'm not saying he's wooden, but he uses furniture polish for makeup.
He's inspired generations.
Great old institution that's been running for almost 30 years, longer than my marriage is put together.
Jim Davison so far, tonight 10:20 on BBC One.
This is the show all about me.
Police protection now on BBC One, but how safe is a safe house?